So in a few weeks' time, we're going to start a new sermon series based on the Sermon on the Mount and entitled A Whole New Way of Being Human. But before we can begin to look at that, we need to think about some other things. So we're actually doing a prequel to the Sermon on the Mount series, and it's called the Sermon on the Mount, the prequel. And the reason we need to do that is because we really need to address what we think about some key things before we can have, if you like, ears to hear what Jesus is teaching us in the Sermon on the Mount. And the prequel topics are what we think about God, what we think about ourselves, and what we think the good life is. And what we think is so important because our minds are the principal way we connect with God. They're our primary source of contact with God. And it's with our minds that we're able to understand God and His boundless riches and so enter into them. So this series we're going to do a lot of thinking, of wrestling, if you like, with what we think. And we'll be thinking about things that we're actually very familiar with, about God, about ourselves. And that familiarity will actually be a barrier that we'll have to overcome in getting our thinking about God based on the reality of who God is. So it's a lot of thinking about our thinking. So to start, what do we think about God? Like, who is Jesus to you? What do you rely on Jesus for? What do you think when you think about Jesus? Like, we'll all kind of answer, God, yes, I know that, and Savior, yes, I know. But who is He to you? So let's think about that for a little bit. And remember, it's thinking about our thinking. And Dallas Willard says of this topic, he said, it's a great and important task to come to terms with what we really think when we think about God. And I'm going to start with an illustration from YouTube. I'm not really that handy around the house, but we live in a house and things break and they need to get fixed. So like taps need to be replaced or whatever. So you go to YouTube and get a video out and look at the video and do what the video says. And now I'm going to boast because a few years ago our washing machine broke and the error code said the carbon brushes needed to be replaced. I didn't know what carbon brushes were. I didn't know what they did. I didn't know what they looked like. I had never heard of them before, but we didn't have money for a new washing machine. So what did I do? I went to YouTube, typed in how to replace carbon brushes on our type of machine, and sure enough, someone was there. And what did I do? I just followed that guy step by step. He knew how, he was the expert, I wasn't, so I just trusted him, and the way that I showed that I trusted him, I just did what he said. And guess what? We got 6 more years out of that washing machine. It's the same with makeup, with baking, with how to repair your computer. There's an expert on YouTube to show you how. And the procedure's always the same. I don't know how to do something that I want to do. I go to the person who knows how to do it, and they're on YouTube, they're the expert. I watch him, and I do what he says, and guess what? I fix the thing that's broken. You just go to the expert. So now remember, we're trying to answer that question, who is Jesus to you? What do we think about when we think about Jesus? So to begin to prod that question, or probe that question, what do you go to Jesus for? What do you think Jesus is expert in? Now, don't rush away from that question. Just, what do you think Jesus is expert in? Well, if you were to think what most people go to Jesus for, and there's lots of different reasons, and 4 occur to me. We go to Jesus for comfort. When our hearts, our minds are hurting, we go to Jesus for comfort. We go to Jesus for healing. When we have a headache or a broken arm, we go to Him for healing. We go to Him for direction. Should I take this job or that job? Should I live in this city or that city? And we want Jesus' input on that. And we go to Jesus for relief or change of painful circumstances. Like, say, a neighbour that you're living beside or a housemate is really unpleasant. You go to Jesus asking Him to change those circumstances. But do you ever go to Jesus because He is the expert in how to live your life right now in the circumstances that you're in right now? How to be that worker, that mother, that father, that single person, that neighbour. That Jesus is actually the expert in that. Like, do you have confidence that Jesus can teach you how to thrive in your life right now, in the circumstances that you're in right now? Even if the circumstances never changed, would you be able to trust your life to Jesus based on who you think he is right now? So in this set of circumstances, is Jesus wise enough, good enough, powerful enough for you to trust your life to him and the outcome of your life to him? And I'm not talking about, is he powerful enough to change the circumstances of your life, but is he powerful enough and trustworthy enough to cause you to thrive in your life where you are right now? Because that's what his invitation is. And how you answer that question is determined by what you really believe about Jesus, about who he really is. So what is it that we're supposed to believe about Jesus? Well, what did the first Christians believe about Jesus? The first Christians, they were all Jews. Peter, Paul, Nicodemus, Mary, they were all Jews. And we see in the Old Testament a history of who they understood God to be and how he was involved in their lives. They understood God was in control of history. He was sovereign. He raised up nations and kings and kingdoms, and he brought them low. He was the one who rescued them out of Egypt by parting the Red Sea. He was the one who sent them into captivity in Babylon. God held the nation of Israel in his hands, always, regardless of the circumstances, and he was working out his purposes in every circumstance. So he was the king, and in his kingdom, what he says goes, and they lived under his rule. They weren't at the mercy of whatever major empire was around. They lived their lives in God's hands. And what was true of the nation of Israel was true for the individual lives of the people as well, even when evil happened. So when evil is done against Joseph, remember his brothers sell him into slavery in Egypt. The way Jesus thought about it, and the way Joseph thought about it, and the way Joseph thought about God and God's involvement in his life was, Joseph said, "You, my brothers, meant this for evil, but God meant it for good." You see, Joseph lived from the understanding that he was not at the mercy of the circumstances of his life, or at the mercy of other people's intentions or even other people's actions, that he lived his life in God's hands. You see, the Jews of Jesus' day understood that God was in charge of the world. He was sovereign over the world, working out his purposes in the world, even in the midst of evil circumstances. And that's why again and again they say something like Psalm 100 verse 3, where they say, "Know that the Lord is God. It is he who made us and we are his. We are his people, the sheep of his pasture." So when Peter and Mary and Martha and Nicodemus and Paul, when they declare that Jesus is the Messiah, that Jesus is God, they aren't simply saying, "I'm trusting Jesus has forgiven my sins and he's bringing me to heaven." That's not what they think about Jesus, or at least that's not all that they think about Jesus. They're saying that Jesus is the one who is sovereign, who is Lord over history. He is the one who raised up kings and kingdoms and brought them low in the Old Testament, and he still does. He is in control not just of nations and history, but in control of all the circumstances of people's lives. Everything that was true about God in the Old Testament is true about Jesus. So when Philip, one of the apostles, when he first meets Jesus, he goes off to find his friend Nathanael. And he says, "We have found the one Moses wrote about in the law, and about whom the prophets also wrote, Jesus of Nazareth, the son of Joseph." That's in John chapter 1. So Jesus is that one. Is that what you think about when you think about Jesus? Because if that's not the way you see Jesus, then you're not thinking about Jesus as he is. And you're thinking about him as something less than he is. And that actually is a huge problem, because we'll never be able to connect with God in a way that we experience him as our shepherd, in a way that we experience his lordship and reign and rule over our lives, unless we begin to think about him as he is. Now listen to what else the Old Testament tells us that this Jesus the one, can do. This is Psalm 51 verse 10. Create in me a pure heart, O God, and renew a steadfast spirit within me. This Jesus of the Old Testament, he can create in you a pure heart. That's a heart free of jealousy and envy, a heart free of pride and fear, a heart free of lust and passivity and bitterness, a heart free of trying to manipulate others, of taking offense, of needing to have the last word, free of self-hatred and holding on to hurts. He can create a pure heart in us. He can renew us with a right spirit. And that renew means repair. He can repair your spirit so that it is as it was meant to be. And then in Psalm 23 verse 3, Jesus is also this one. He is the one who can restore your soul. In other words, he can restore your whole self, body, mind, spirit, in a way that it's fully integrated and whole. So we need to ask ourselves questions. Do we think that Jesus can teach us how to become the kind of person who doesn't envy? How to become the kind of person who doesn't lust? To become the kind of person who isn't jealous, who isn't mean, who isn't short-tempered? And I'm not talking about just gritting your teeth and through sheer willpower trying to change your behavior, but actually learning to become that kind of person, a new kind of person, a new way of being human. Surely that is what was meant by becoming a new creation and learning from him that Mary referred to in her sharing. Like, do you think Jesus is an expert in loving and in generosity and in kindness and in forgiving, and that he can train you to become that kind of person? See, that's who Jesus is. He's that one. Is that, and the question is that what we think about when we think about Jesus? You see, Jesus isn't just someone we should go to for comfort, although we should, and for direction, and for healing that headache, and for relief from painful circumstances. Jesus is an expert in how to live your life right now, where you are. And he can teach you how to live your life as if he was living it. So the question is, how would you know if you believe that Jesus is an expert in living life to you? How would you know that you regard him as that expert? Well, if you think about the guys on YouTube, the experts, how do you know that they're the experts, that you think they're the experts? You simply do what they say. You go to the channel and simply follow them. Like, say, for taking the carbon brushes off, he had the steps. Take the cover off the motor, check. Loosen the mooring for the carbon brushes, check. Remove the brushes and replace the new brushes, being careful to put them at right angles to the drum, check. Reassemble the washing machine, check. And then off you go. When you meet an expert on YouTube and you're just a learner, you simply do what he says. The way I showed I trusted the washing machine expert was that I simply did what he says. And it's the same with Jesus. You would know if you think Jesus is the expert in how to live your life in all the circumstances of your life if you do what he says. Now, it'd be really easy to do what he says if Jesus had a YouTube channel. You just go in and type and he will take you through it. But in a sense, he kind of does have a YouTube channel. He has left us his word, which the Bible tells us is living and active, sharper than any two-edged sword that penetrates even to dividing soul and spirit and joints and marrow, and it judges the thoughts, or it discerns the thoughts and attitudes of our heart. So what it's saying is that actually God's word can penetrate to us deep, deep down inside and make us whole. And he's also left us his spirit who will lead us in all truth. So his word and his spirit. So given that we have, if you like, Jesus' YouTube channel in the form of his word and his spirit, again we can ask the question, how would you know if you really believe that Jesus is an expert in living your life? The way you know is you simply do what he says. Jesus is really clear about that. In John chapter 14 verse 15, Jesus says, if you love me, you will keep my commands. Now the NIV doesn't have you will in there, but it is in the Greek, and it's important to be in there because if you just say, if you love me, keep my commands, it can feel like, if you love me, keep my commands, like a giving out type thing. But Jesus is just simply stating the obvious. He says, if you love me, which includes trust me, which includes think I'm an expert in life, then the natural outcome of that trust is that you will keep my commands because they reflect my expertise made available to you. And then disobedience isn't like just rule breaking. Disobedience is thinking, I can't trust Jesus in this situation. His wisdom, his expertise won't work in this situation. Now remember, right from the start, what we're trying to do is think about what we think about Jesus. And Jesus here is saying that obedience shows us what we think about him. It's not rule keeping, it's not keeping on God's good side, but properly understood what obedience is, it's the act of someone who trusts that Jesus is the one. He is the Lord of history, he's the Lord of your life, at work in every circumstance of your life. And he can, as you trust him, he can make sure what he wants done is done in your life. So obedience, properly understood, is confidence in Jesus, dependence on Jesus. That's where we get that saying, friendship, dependence, obedience. So how do we get there? How do we begin on this journey? Well, it all starts with, it all revolves around a vision of Jesus. The same vision that Philip had when he went to Nathanael and he said, we have found the one. So it's a vision, it's an understanding of Jesus that he really is the God of the Old Testament, sovereign over everything in nations and in countries and in continents and in your life. That he can teach you how to live your life in a way that you live it to the full, with his joy, his peace, his kindness, his transformation, his healing, regardless of the circumstances of your life. It's a vision of Jesus as he is. That's how we begin. So can I leave you with some things to do? This sermon actually needs thinking about. So re-listen to it. Then join one of the growth groups that are using this sermon series as a basis for their discussion. It will help you to wrestle with who you think Jesus really is. And then just to ask you, is the Jesus that you believe, the Jesus in your life, the all-powerful God of the Old Testament, ruling over everything, where you can say like Joseph, you meant it for evil, but God meant it for good. And then, secondly, do you believe that Jesus' expertise can make you the kind of person with a pure heart, the kind of person who has a restored soul? Because that's who the Jesus of the Old Testament is. Now just let me pray. Lord, would you give us a picture of you, not as we think you are, but as you are. So that we would say to ourselves and to others, we have found the one Moses spoke about. The one who we can place our whole lives in his care, regardless of the circumstances. Lord, would you give us a vision of who you are by your Spirit? Amen.